Hi, everyone. So we're going to begin promptly while we let everyone else trickle in. Um, but I just wanted to say hello and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tyler Girbano and I use he, they pronouns. I'm the accessibility officer at the McLaren Arts Center. Um, and I'm reaching you from the gallery in downtown Barrie. Before we get started, I'd just like to offer a land acknowledgement. The McLaren Arts Center is located on unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Bodwe Otomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. The local bands consist of the Chippewa Tri Council, who are made up of Beausoleil First Nation, Georgina Island First Nation, and Rama First Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge the Wendat Huron Nation who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. As a settler, I'm grateful to live and work in this place, and I hope that through land acknowledgements, we can be reminded of our responsibilities to the people who live on and care for the land and the land itself. I'm really fortunate to have such a distinguished group of panelists here with us tonight to talk about the art practice of California-based animator Tarun Lak. I was introduced to Tarun a few months ago as the McLaren was planning to launch its inaugural Wintertide program, which concluded in the wee hours of this morning. The program saw downtown Barrie windows filled with larger than life projections of artwork by regional and international artists, including Angela Ajla of Innisfil, David Andrick of Barrie, Crystal Ball of Toronto and Jamaica, and of course, the award-winning animator who we're about to speak with tonight, Tarun. So Tarun is an Indian American artist who was born in the US, though he spent most of his childhood growing up in Chennai, India, where he could often be found drawing instead of studying for exams. And those are his words, not mine, but I think that given all that he has accomplished, it was a good decision for him to draw as often as he could. After finishing high school, he attended Ringling College of Art Design in Florida, where he graduated with a BFA in computer animation in 2016. Tarun has since worked in the American animation industry at studios like LAIKA and Sony Pictures Imageworks, and is currently an animator at Pixar Animation Studios. His feature film credits include Kubo and the Two Strings, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Onward, and Soul, all films which many of us have heard of. Currently, he resides in Emeryville, California, and tonight I'm excited that we're going to hear more about his personal art practice rather than the work under the studios that I just mentioned. So we have some wonderful panelists joining us today. But first, Alana Traficante, a Toronto-based writer, curator, and gallery director. She graduated from OCAD's Criticism and Curatorial Practice MFA program in 2016, and is currently the executive director of Gallery 44 Center for Contemporary Photography. She previously worked as the adjunct curator of contemporary art at the Art Gallery of Hamilton, where she co-curated the award-winning exhibition, This Is Serious, Canadian indie comics with cartoonist Joe Allman in 2019. Also joining us tonight are two special guests. First, Dr. Deepali Dewan is the Dan Mishra Curator of South Asian Art and Culture at the ROM and teaches in the Department of Art History at the University of Toronto. She's the co-editor of Trans Asian Photography, co-author of Raja Deen Dayal, Artist Photographer in the 19th Century India, an author of Embellished Reality, Indian Painted Photographs 2012, and editor of Bollywood Cinema Show Cards, Indian Film Art from the 1950s to 1980s. Dr. Sailaja Krishnamurti is an associate professor of religious studies and women and gender studies at St. Mary's University. Her research takes a critical feminist approach to religion and representation in South Asian diaspora and in contemporary culture. She's currently working on a book about South Asian religions in comics and graphic novels, and teaches courses like Religion and Comics and the Future at St. Mary's. Welcome to all of you for to contribute to what I know will be an amazing talk about Tarun's practice. We're going to play Tarun's artwork that was part of Wintertide in just a moment, just so we can all take that in one more time. But before we do that, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our sponsors and partners and contributors without whom Wintertide wouldn't have happened. So first of all, thank you to the City of Barrie, the Sargent Company here in Barrie, and to Karen Carter for making this inaugural event possible. Thank you to the Sandbox Center and Chris for helping us organize and present this talk. National Show Systems, who transformed the McLaren and downtown storefronts with their projections. The Canadian War Museum, the Simcoe County Archives and Baseborden Museum, who provided research and contributed historic images of Black Canadian soldiers to our windows, and to our founding sponsor, Georgian BMW Mini. Now I would invite Chris from the Sandbox to play India vignettes for us all, and then I'll hand over the reins to Alana and Tarun to begin the conversation. So thank you. That was so wonderful. Thank you so much for contributing that to Wintertide, Tarun. So now I'll hand it over to Alana and Tarun.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Tyler, for that lovely introduction. And
yes, thank you.
Yeah, really
that was wonderful. Yeah.
And really nice to see the work again, and I know for lots of folks who may have seen it in Barrie, this would be the first opportunity to see the animation, but also hear the sound, which I think plays an important role in the work. So that's great. And I think what we'll do is Tarun and I will just start in conversation. I have a few questions that I prepared, and then we'll open it up to some commentary and feedback from Deepali and Silaja. Before we start, Tarun, was there anything in particular you wanted to say to introduce your practice, or do you want to dive right into questions?
Yeah, so I don't really think of my personal art as having a practice per se. It's just kind of something I like to do in my spare time. So it's more so a hobby than anything else outside of my my day job.
Well, now we get to talk about it in the context of a contemporary art installation, which is really exciting, and have all these really wonderful contributors also give some commentary on the work. And I know for myself, I found the piece to be really incredible because of some of the research that I've done around contemporary like still comics, and in particular comics made in Canada, but their relationship to like personal narrative and memory. So I was really drawn to your work because it has a real personal and sort of tender appeal that does this really great job of conveying an innate sense of nostalgia that you have for a particular time and place, which is your childhood in Chennai, South India. And when you and I spoke just a few weeks ago for me to sort of learn a little bit more about the work. You describe the scenes in these vignettes as being more what you called like distant and observatory recollections, more so than actual childhood memories. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so yeah, I couldn't put it better myself. So essentially, that's what it was. I was trying to remember moments that I'd either like observed or kind of experienced in some small way, but these pieces weren't exact replicas of what I had seen exactly. It was more trying to capture the flavor of what that is. So they're um, they're kind of a lot of different observations kind of combined and uh, showcased in a way where it's like it's part of like a single entity that can that evokes a certain mood and nostalgic quality.
And there was one in particular that you said was drawn from memories of your grandfather. Is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, the one with the old man in the chair falling asleep, that's more so definitely based on my grandfather, and I definitely remember a lot of moments where he would be reading a newspaper on a very similar cane chair that I had drawn, and he would just, you know, take a nap. And I that was like one of many moments I feel like where you that's kind of what you remember a lot when you think back on childhood memories, but it doesn't really, you don't think of it as moments that really affect um, your life in a big way. It's just kind of little moments that kind of make up life.
Yeah, it's like these sort of more mundane kind of everyday experiences that might not be markers of specific memories, but it kind of creates the tone of sort of day-to-day life. And I thought you did that really nicely with that short vignette of the two girls eating lunch together and their sort of delight in sharing food and their movements. I was
Thank you.
curious if, because you say, you know, you think of this as being more of a hobby. So I wondered if you had initially kind of set out with an idea that you wanted to make a series of 5 vignettes that specifically, you know, were reminiscent of this kind of feeling of childhood memory, or if you sort of created one and then that led to another. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I didn't really set out to make a series per se, or it was, I was trying to discover a little bit, and I'd done a couple pieces of animation before this that kind of led to this series that was kind of inching toward the subject matter and tone and the slice of life observant nature of it all. So it was more so myself trying to discover what it is that I want to convey in a personal piece of art. So that's kind of how it came out. So I tried out animating a couple other like smaller vignette sort of things, and I started to develop a sense of like, oh, I want to push this part of it a little further, and I think the first one where I felt like I did it was the one with the coconut water vendor and the schoolboy kind of buying some coconut water. That was kind of the piece where I felt like, okay, yeah, I hit something that I was trying to get at. And once I did that and kind of saw a huge positive response online, uh, it made me start aching to do even more. So that's kind of how it became a series, I think. So it was definitely a more organic sort of process.
And so the first one that you created was it the coconut water that came first?
Yeah, yeah. And it was kind of like right when I finished it, I I knew I was able to, it was kind of the first time in I think a very long time that I was able to kind of get something from inside myself and kind of actually put it down and feel like, oh yeah, this was what I was trying to envision, and I was able to execute it, at least to my own satisfaction. So yeah, it was after that, right when I finished it, I felt like, oh yeah, I have like a few more that I have ideas for, and so that's how the rest came about.
When Tyler gave your introduction and said that as a kid, like you were more often drawing than studying, it made me think of the vignette of the young boy who's like kind of doing his homework but falling asleep and then gets distracted by the cricket bat. So it sort of made that as maybe that piece is a little bit autobiographical. I don't know.
I think it is. I was trying to make it less autobiographical by using a cricket bat instead of having him doodle. Although I did used to play cricket here and there, but it wasn't like a huge passion of mine or anything. But it is something that a lot of boys growing up, there are moments like that happen a lot where they get distracted by sports, and when they should be studying, they'd be playing around with a cricket bat or a ball. So that's kind of how that came about, but it's definitely shows a little bit more about myself, I think, than some of the others.
Yeah, I hadn't had that insight before until that came up in your bio, so I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
I wondered if we could talk a little bit about the some of the specific visual elements that come up in the piece. Like there are props and objects that I think are meant to be really specific to time and place, and what I think really stuck out to me is like these very subtle gestures that the characters make that really give it that slice of life quality that you referred to. And I think it was Tyler who mentioned, and I looked out for it when I rewatched it, but the mother and her son who are filling up water at the water pump, and when she sits the vessel up on her head, she just slightly adjusts the
her sari,
her sari on her shoulder, and it's just these are the kinds of things that seem to be just such interesting observations that give it a real life kind of quality. I wondered if you're how much you're thinking through these kinds of elements, like the gestures and the objects, but also like the sense of color, which has there's a really nice sort of palette that's uniform throughout the 5 vignettes, and how that helps you to craft like that sense of tenderness and nostalgia.
That's you kind of covered a lot there. So I think I'll start with the gestures, and the gestures side of things I kind of think about a lot, not just with these pieces, but also with my job as an animator. And especially with these pieces, I knew I wanted to evoke like a closer to life type of naturalistic feeling. So I knew the gestures that I was going to have had to be more observant than maybe some of the films that I've been a part of. And like you said, I think that's kind of what makes it feel more slice of life. It's kind of details that might seem unnecessary if the vignettes were part of a larger plot-driven story. These kind of little tiny details might not be necessary for that, but I think that's what actually gives it the feeling of life. So it was definitely stuff that I thought a lot about, and I also would do like research for each of these pieces. So I was looking a lot at a lot of videos of people getting water from water pumps, and that was kind of a moment. The adjusting of the sari was always something I was picking up on as I was watching different videos online. So I knew like that felt like so naturalistic that I had to find a point where I could use it, because otherwise it doesn't really feel believable that she is wearing that outfit. there's a way that the outfit kind of affects your physicality in small, subtle ways. And I think, yeah, trying to include like one or two of them that kind of felt specific to the clothes. Even with the kid, after the mom splashes water, he kind of wipes his face with his shirt. And that was another place where I really wanted to kind of use every element of the character in a way to kind of make it feel like they are wearing these clothes, and that's kind of part of their day-to-day lives like any of us. So it was definitely something I thought a lot about.
And what about color? Because I think that's one of, it's really interesting that there's this, it's a pretty minimal palette that you sort of carry through all of the 5 vignettes. And I always wonder, in terms of like, for illustrators and animators, if you're sort of thinking about color at the outset, if color comes later, like how much that's in the initial concept for the piece?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The color, I think from the get-go, is kind of important to me as well, because that has a huge part in the tone that you want to convey. So I knew the color palette had to be simple, because there's also the technical element of actually frame by frame coloring each character and each element of color. So I knew I had to keep it to a smaller number. So that kind of meant I needed to be smarter about my color choices, because I didn't want to have a huge range to play with. And the backgrounds I kind of kept really simple. A lot of them, they kind of have a really wide space of almost no background. And that was kind of intentional to give the feeling of vignette. Like I feel like the audience can kind of fill up a little bit of that information if I'm just providing the main key points of information. So, and you're just kind of, as an audience, hopefully you're just kind of focused on the primary element. And I would like to think in your mind, you can kind of imagine what the background might be. So yeah, keeping all of those things in mind, I tried to make my color choices based around that. And a lot of the colors are warmer tinted. So, I would say like most of it are like warmer colors. So I had to try and balance a couple of elements with cooler colors just to kind of balance the whole image. And I think I naturally tend to gravitate toward warmer colors. So I kind of leaned into that with these pieces. And then, yeah, beyond that, it's just kind of balancing elements of color within each piece. And I wasn't thinking too far ahead in terms of how this would all look as a series. But thankfully, I think because I did them all myself and they kind of came from the same place, I was able to keep it somewhat consistent so that it doesn't feel like completely different pieces all strung up together.
And then I guess I was curious too about, because you've sort of reduced the background in most of the vignettes, a fair bit, there are then these objects or props or like these, sort of key items that accompany the characters. Like you mentioned your grandfather's chair, for example. And I was also thinking about like the cricket bat. And were you drawing that also specifically from memory? Or you mentioned that you watched like some source videos, and were you sort of inspired by certain objects or things that people were using?
Yeah, I think it's slightly different for every piece. For the grandfather piece, it was definitely, I kind of knew exactly the type of chair I wanted. And I did look up some reference just to get some of the specific details right, because there is a specific way the cane chairs are made and how they're kind of tied up together, and the kind of structure of it, which I can't really exactly pull from memory. I just know the feeling of it. So I knew I wanted that prop, like that was important for me. But with some of the other ones, I think, like with the water pump, because I never experienced that myself, like as someone who has to collect water from a water pump. I'd never done that myself, so, but I'd definitely seen it happen around. So I had to do a little more research in trying to find the kind of water pump and what that would look like. And so the design of the pump is a fairly standard pump that you would find in a lot of places in India. So that was pretty specific to kind of the research that I had done. And with the cricket bat, I kind of knew I needed a cricket bat. So it was, I didn't really need any reference for it, I think. Because that was kind of an integral prop. And I'm fairly familiar with cricket bats, so I was able to kind of pull from memory for the most part. And with that prop, at least for me, what was even more important than the look of it was kind of the feeling of it. The kind of weight that a cricket bat has is very, very specific. It's kind of bottom heavy almost because of how the wood is carved out. So getting the weight was, I think, more important than the actual look of it.
That's really interesting.
And how you would grip the cricket bat, I think even that's a fairly specific thing to. I think like the equivalent of a baseball bat. I'm sure there's specific grips that you would need to have. So I kind of knew some of that just from my own experience. So that was kind of important for me there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting because when you think about, it's a 1.5-minute video is 5 vignettes, but there's so much complexity that goes into kind of building this, what you call sort of reflexive or observatory slice of life kind of quality. And it also really comes through in the music, which you said sort of came a bit later, right? And but it's actually your father, who's a classical violinist, who's performing the piece. Do you want to talk about how you involved him and how that came to be?
Yeah, so I had kind of finished all 5 pieces, and I kind of knew I wanted to stop there. Not because I didn't want to do more. I just felt like if I did more, I might end up messing up the series. So I kind of decided that was a good place to stop it. And I felt like if I was gonna make this like into one cohesive, series, then 5 would be. I think anything more than 5 would start to tire the audience a little bit because of the way it's paced. So I didn't want people to have to sit through too many like really slow paced. Because I know just from my film experience how pacing and the audience attentions kind of work. So I kind of stopped it there. So stringing it up together, I felt like it was missing music, and I hadn't thought about it until then. And there's no sound already. There's no sort of source sound, you could say. So immediately I thought of my dad, just because he'd been playing classical violin for a very long time and all through my childhood too. And that was always something kind of in the background in my life, like hearing classical music, like whether he was playing or listening to it. So and since that was kind of part of my childhood in its own way, I thought it would be good to kind of connect that with these other like vignettes about childhood. So I thought I would give it a shot. So I asked him, and he was very happy to do it. So, and I kind of left it up to him what he wanted to record. So he thought of this piece, which is sorry, I'm blanking on the name at this very moment, but Dadra in Rag Kamaj. So he kind of thought of that and thought it would fit well with the piece. So yeah, he played that, and I liked it a lot. So and then it was a matter of kind of figuring out the placement of which vignette would come at which point so that it could go well with the music. So yeah, but the music came at the very end. It was almost an afterthought, which I slightly maybe regret, but it still turned out okay.
Yeah, it comes across as like a really integral part of the piece. So, you know, it's a non-visual element, but it feels like it's a piece of like a greater whole. And you touched a little bit just now on this idea of like rhythm and timing. And I think music plays into that, but maybe you could explain a little bit more about that, like how that sort of played into creating this slice of life sort of characteristic to the work.
I think with the music, because it has its own inbuilt sense of rhythm, it was trying to figure out, okay, like which pieces could kind of match that rhythm in a way. It's not like the music is kind of following the same beats as the visuals. So it didn't really need to match for me. And I actually preferred that it didn't match, so that you kind of feel like this is kind of like a background score almost, rather than animation that's playing to music. So it wasn't too hard to figure out exactly the placement of it, but rhythm played a much bigger role, I think, while I was animating. So timing in animation is a really important element, and it's definitely something I think about a lot. And the larger sense of timing in one like cohesive piece, I like to think of that as the rhythm of the piece. So that's kind of where I spent a lot of thinking in terms of rhythm and what kind of beats, like the timing of each beat and how that flows together, slower beats versus faster beats, and how much movement is there on screen and where are you looking on screen. I think all of those things kind of contribute to rhythm. So I did spend a lot of time thinking about that early on when I was beginning to animate.
And when you and I spoke to, it was interesting how, and you just touched on it just now as well, when you talk about like this is like your personal artistic hobby, you call it, but we'll call it your artistic practice. But you also work as an animator in the film industry. And as Tyler mentioned, you've contributed to like all kinds of like well-known feature-length animated films and award-winning films. And I was curious if you think about like the industry influence, like how that influences this particular piece, or if you see your artistic work as being like a complete departure from that or more of an extension.
I think it's I've been working for about 5 years professionally, so and I've learned a really great deal from my experience working on films. So it was kind of definitely very much part of this piece. I think everything that I've learned through the years, I've definitely kind of put into this, but in slightly applying it in slightly different ways, I think, and maybe in a more liberal way, because I'm kind of controlling the entire piece myself. So whereas on films, I'm working on films that are directed by other people, and there's a huge team involved, kind of choreographing the whole film. So yeah, with this piece, it was, yeah, there was a lot of things that I had learned over the years that I was definitely trying to put in. And I think it had also helped me grow in my taste and my skill set in general. So I don't think without having gone through all the experience that I did, I don't think I would have been able to pull this off, because it definitely took all that knowledge to actually put this on screen. I think even if it was just for myself. And I kind of touched on it earlier, where I didn't really feel like I was able to take something from within and actually put it down in a way where I was happy with how it turned out, and it felt like what I was trying to put down. And this was the first time I was able to do that, and a large part of that is kind of the skills I've gained over the years, kind of working as a professional.
And it's also like it's a non-narrative piece too, right? Like I think it seems like with, maybe you've worked on like a larger or more feature-length narrative films, but this has maybe allowed you to have a bit of distinction in terms of this being more observatory, or it's meant to be slice of life or vignettes. That was maybe a bit of a choice, I guess, to take it in a different direction, right?
It definitely was, yeah. I think it, because I was so used to working narratively, it was kind of a little liberating to not have to think about that. But there was definitely things that I had learned through working on narrative stuff, like the audience pacing, attention element that I kind of mentioned. I think that's something that I learned kind of working as part of the film. And I had that in the back of my mind, that's why I kind of decided to stop at 5. Because yeah, other than not wanting to mess it up beyond that, it was, I kind of knew if I had more than that, it would, I think I would start to lose the engagement for the piece as a whole. So it's kind of like leaving the audience wanting a little bit more. So you kind of stop just a little ahead of that. So that's something I kind of picked up working on films. But yeah, there were other decisions that were very much away from the narrative side of thinking, like the aspect ratio, having a square-based aspect ratio. Yeah, people don't do that in film now. And not having much of the background, that's another element. And not really having much of a story change. There are maybe a couple emotional changes, but there's nothing that's propelling a plot forward or anything. It's just kind of, if you didn't see these moments, nothing would really change in the person's lives, I don't think. So at least not in any significant way. So those were, I think, the some of the bigger differences from working in film.
I think that's so interesting. That secret, that insider secret about having the audience want more, I think is that's interesting to learn. I think we're going to call in our commentators.
Yeah, I think this is a really good time to bring in Deepali and Sailaja. And while we do that, why don't we get Chris to play another little clip of another piece that Tarun has worked on.
It's very short.
That's great. Yeah, so welcome to Deepali and Silaja. I think it's just a nice opportunity to have you guys join now, because it may be nice to sort of hear your response. Just as we're talking about sort of how people respond, audiences respond, it might be a nice opportunity to turn to you both and hear a bit of more sort of in the moment response to these particular works. I don't know, Deepali, would you like to start?
Should I jump in?
Yeah.
You can unmute yourself, Sailaja, and just jump in too if you want. You know, I actually really appreciated learning about your work and seeing these vignettes when the McLaren decided to bring them to Canada and project them large scale on the outside of their building. And, you know, I actually was very interested to hear you talk about how you made certain choices, you know, that this was about, you know, depicting these little moments in everyday life, but from your memory, or that at least they were evocative in your memory. But in order to create them, you did have to go and do some research. You know, you did have to go and watch some videos. And, you know, that was one of the things that, you know, really kind of, you know, I was a little fascinated with, and it's the thing that I noticed that gets commented on in your Instagram feed also when you posted these. It's the people are talking about the power of observation. It's the little details that provide the emotional baggage, provide that emotional, you know, connection to people. And this one that we just showed of a man sipping tea is what you call it. It's not part of that set. It looks maybe your first draft, you know, like either something you did before that set, or I'm not sure after. It's got a slightly different look to it, but I think it has all the qualities of it. And for some reason, it really speaks to me about bringing out those details. I mean, the smallest thing from, you know, the way he holds the glass when he drinks his tea, right? And the way he like puts out his lips. I mean, you know this, like anybody who's seen this in India, like knows this scene so intimately. And it's those details that are the ones I think that provide that affective, that emotional dimension to it. And so I guess, you know, what I want to kind of know is, I want to hear you talk a bit more about how you made those choices, you know, like what part, when you did your research, you know, why certain details versus others? I mean, even to the point of with this man sipping tea, you know, he's got this little paunch, you know, he's an office guy, and you know, he's gone for his break, you know, and he sits all day and he's had he's going outside for his tea, and the way he puts one foot up on the other step. I mean, this is all like, if you know, you know, like these are all like such familiar moments. And so I want to hear like a little bit more about how you made those choices when you were watching those videos. In some ways, you are connecting to your own memory through the research, right? And perhaps things that were not at the front of your brain or in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for all the kind words. Yeah, with this first piece that just kind of played, this was, you know, like one of the first things that I had animated that was kind of inching toward the Vignettes series that I had done. And it was the piece right after this that was the coconut vendor one. So this was kind of the piece that directly led me to that. And the only reason I didn't include this as part of the whole set was I felt like in the planning of this particular piece, I was a little lazy thinking about it as its own sort of entity. I was almost thinking too much as purely an animator, because that's what I'm used to. Is I'm at my job, I'm purely an animator. I'm assigned characters to give life to, and I have to keep in mind the other elements that are part of the film or whatever project it is, but I'm not necessarily creating what that is. So as soon as I finished this, I kind of felt like, you know, it was a missed opportunity in thinking about, you know, the color palette and the entire look of the picture, and you know, how the background is specifically designed, there wasn't as much thought into those kind of things compared to the rest of it. So, and I had kind of lip sync some dialogue in this piece where he kind of asks for tea, and you see his mouth kind of mime that. And that was, again, like one of those things that I hadn't planned ahead in thinking about, you know, if I'm not going to include dialogue in this, then I should try to make it work without hinting at dialogue either. So there were certain choices there that I kind of felt like drove me into a corner into not including this as part of the set. So going forward, I kept all of those things in mind. So so I wouldn't feel bad about it later. But yeah, as far as the observed gestures and little details, some of them are from memory, like with the tea guy, you know, definitely. I don't think I did any research actually for that one. That was kind of purely based on like a distant memory of like seeing a bunch of people throughout my childhood kind of sipping tea on the corner of a street. So, and a lot of, I think all of those people that you kind of observe through that time, it all kind of condenses into one singular like type of feeling. And some of the details kind of stick to you and some of them don't. Like, I think the way he walks, his gait was something that I kind of remembered. Like, a lot of people walk this certain way, and a lot of them also sit a certain way, you know, with 1 foot on a step and 1 foot below the step. There are things like that that just kind of felt like, oh yeah, this is what they did. Like, it's almost like I'm not really making a choice. It's just, that's what they did. So I have to put it there. Otherwise it just doesn't feel right. And the way he calls for tea, you know, like thinking about his personality a little bit, like if he comes there often, like there's a certain level of comfort in his relationship with the tea seller. So even the way he asks for tea is a little bit like nonchalant and trying to evoke that sort of feeling in it. And you know, with the way he sips tea, that's, you know, if the tea is hot, you know, you're going to sip it a certain way. So there's a certain level of, if you don't do that, then it doesn't sell the fact that this is tea and it's not hot. So there are things like yeah, and you can't, like, you know, gulp it right away. So there are certain things that I've kind of learned to think about as an animator, you know, to kind of sell certain you know, feelings. You have to portray it in a certain way. And because we're kind of playing with visuals and we can kind of do whatever we want, like if we make a mistake, we're kind of owning that like that mistake comes from us. It's not, if this were a live action film, say, if you film someone getting tea, you're going to get all this for free almost. But if you don't put that in, then as an animator, then it doesn't work, I think. So I think it demands a certain level of observation.
Maybe I'll just also just push that a little bit. You know, that's one of the things I was wondering about, because in some ways, you know, you're pulling on memory, but you're also creating characters, right? So these are types. These are, you know, not specific people, but they're types of people that you remember, or that, you know, are particularly in South Indian life. I would say it's got a very South Indian feel to it. And I'm curious about in what ways, you know, these kind of lessons you've learned from your, we can call it your day job, have applied to how you've made choices in producing these ones. Even though it's a personal project, you're calling it a hobby. I would say that maybe you've crossed over into artistic practice. Especially as you said, you finally felt like you hit the tone that you wanted with this particular series. And I'm wondering about how the choices you've made in what you've included here and how you've created the characters are either similar to what you do in your animation practice in your day job or different.
Yeah, so at least with my job as an animator, I'm not really creating the characters per se. They're kind of a lot of the writing is done beforehand, so there's already a sense of who they are, and we as animators kind of have to bring them to life with these little details, to like either physical details or like emotional details, and kind of make them feel alive rather than kind of entities that have just been written. So there's that side of it. And in terms of like creating these characters kind of from scratch or from memory, there's a certain level of, I have to think more about, who these people are, and like, what are the clothes they wear, and what are their lives like, that I don't necessarily have to think about from scratch, at my job. So there were those sort of elements, like creating the relationships between at least the two character pieces. There's 3 2-character pieces in this series, and kind of selling what that relationship is, I think it was something I was aching to do, and I'm glad I was able to hit something there. But as far as I think I got away from your question a little bit.
Just how the choices that you made on how to depict these people are consistent with the kinds of strategies used by some of the animation companies you've worked for, or are they different?
I think it's the same, honestly, because that's kind of where I learned it from, and that's how I apply it at my job. So that's just kind of part of how I do things as an animator myself. So I don't think there was a huge departure in that sense. On a craft level, I work on computer animated movies, so it's all CG, and at least this was hand drawn. So at least the technique used to execute it was different. So there's a certain element of design that I don't do at my job, that I had to think a lot about, like design and color. What do the characters look like, their proportions, the simplicity versus complexity of the design, and the juxtaposition between the different characters to kind of sell them as different people just by the way they look and the way they dress and stuff. So even the way they hold themselves, that's kind of part of being an animator, but I also think of it as a little bit part of the design too. A person's physical being, that's kind of the mechanism with how they're able to move. So that kind of defines a lot of the actions that they can or can't do. Like a person's age, for example, is a big factor in how fast or slow they can move, or their agility. So, but yeah, there's not a huge difference in the way I think about it at my job or on this. It's just kind of, I think, inbuilt to my craft, at least.
Well, yeah, I'd like to bring Sailaja in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I want to sort of jump in there because, and thank you for your response to Deepali's questions. what I'm hearing in the response that you were just sort of talking through is something that was kind of bubbling for me as I was watching these pieces, which is about nostalgia and identity. And I kind of I want to come at this in a few directions. So, you know, for me, watching when I first encountered these vignettes as a 1.5 generation person, right? I grew, you know, I came to Canada as a child and went back and forth to India when I was younger. These memories are so poignant for me, right? I mean, I feel like I know this grandfather. I know that coconut you know, cart. They're, and I think a lot of the comments on your Instagram feed kind of reflect that as well. People find these very familiar. The way in which you've chosen to have these very neutral backgrounds makes them feel like they're sort of dreamlike images, like they're images that could have come out of my own dreams in some way. So there's something very very tender and emotional for me about interacting with these images. And so, you know, I think that makes me think that there's something quite intimate about them for you as the maker. And I'm wondering, in your conversation about, you know, your professional life as an animator versus your personal life, it's interesting to me that you, in these very personal works, that you've chosen this hand-drawn technique, that you have chosen these memories that are so connected to childhood, but also to India in a very particular way. And also images of India that tell a story about a sort of a very golden kind of moment, right? Like these are really happy, sweet memories. And I think with the example of the mother and the child at the water pump, also one which is imagined for you. This is an imagined version of an India, right? So I want to ask you a little bit about what that experience is for you. Is this work a way of you connecting or thinking through your Indianness, your sense of yourself as an artist, as opposed to an animator for hire? And I guess I would also add to that, like, just it's so sweet to me that you had your father's music as part of this piece, and also kind of makes me think of the intimacy of the work. So just, you know, what is the journey of yourself and your identity in this work?
Yeah, I'm actually very similar to you. You kind of mentioned, you know, you'd gone back and forth between India and Canada, and I was kind of the same growing up. I was born in the US, but fairly young, we moved to India, and then we came back to the US, and then we went back to India, and then I came back to the US to pursue college, and I've been here since. But so that's kind of been just part of my life, kind of both sides of it. And maybe it kind of allows me to see India as an outsider, but also having been part of it, I can also feel the intimacy from my experience there. So I think that was always kind of just part of me, and I was kind of feeling it had been a few years since I had moved out of India, so I think some of these memories were feeling a little like really distant to me already. So, and that kind of provided like a hazy dream-like quality that I think actually helped me evoke that same feeling, because maybe I have that sense of distance and kind of being more nostalgic about it rather than living there now and trying to portray it. I think it would have probably turned out different, maybe better. I don't know, but I think the way it turned out is definitely more in line with how I feel about it in my memory. So, and I think I think the word maybe you were looking for was like an innocent quality, at least which I was trying to go for, because these were tied to my childhood, and I had only I haven't spent my adult life over there apart from a few short visits. So all my memories from India are definitely more on the innocent side. So at least for me, that's all I kind of had to pull from, and I generally like at least at this time in the world, you know, with the pandemic and everything else going on, I was kind of missing some of that sense of innocence that maybe I had growing up. Like, of course, there's always been problems, but at least in my mind, they weren't, you know, present. So that I think that's kind of part of it, and I think maybe a lot of I think everyone from their memories of childhood, they always have that sense of innocence in the way they look back to it. The sense of nostalgia is very, it's strong and kind of pure in a way. So yeah, that, I was very intentionally trying to evoke that. And I'm super happy it came across and that it actually connected to a lot of people, a lot more than I ever thought. And that, yeah, that personally gave me a lot of confidence in my own work and my growth as an artist. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
You know, just going off of that, I feel like one of the things is I want to hear about, you know, well, who was your imagined viewer? You know, when you created these, you know, certainly in some ways the diasporic, South Asian diasporic community, you know, connects with it, but you're in the business of animation. In some ways that's supposed to speak to a very wide audience. So who was your imagined viewer for these vignettes?
That's a really good question, but I think my answer is probably going to disappoint you because I really wasn't thinking about anyone. I think I just had this feeling that I had to try to put this down for myself, and just kind of, I think what I was yearning to do as an artist after gaining all the skills that I had, I wanted to apply it in a way that was a little more intimate to me. So I wasn't really thinking about an audience per se, but I did, you know, I think a little bit of me did think about, you know, is this piece understandable, like from an objective point of view? Like, is it so personal that, you know, if anyone sees it, will they get it? Or like, will they recognize what is even happening? And I think that's also kind of built in to myself as being an animator. Because an audience has to understand this, you kind of have to make things clear, and kind of make a statement. And I think that was a very valuable lesson for me as a professional. So I wanted to take that forward here, but try to do it in a maybe more subtler way, trying to control what I'm making clear and what I'm kind of leaving blank for the audience to maybe feel instead. So.
And so what do you think about audience now that the vignettes are projected large scale on a museum in Canada?
It's amazing. I wish I could see it, and it's such an honor. Like I never thought so many people would see it, let alone on a big screen. You know, I never intended this to be seen like in a large setting, because to me it was always like a very small. Even while working on it, it was always like small on my screen, and at least in my mind, they were just always small. So it kind of blows my mind that people have seen this big and that so many people have seen it too. Like it's quite amazing to me. And super honored. And just the fact that it's connected with so many people, I think, at least for myself, like, I don't know that there's much else that you can ask for as someone who's creating something. You know, if people connect with it, that's kind of that's it. That's like the biggest gift in itself.
So if I could just ask probably a fairly quick question. I was just thinking about how I'm in Nova Scotia, so I wasn't going to ever be able to see the big projection on the building. So my interaction with the images has been through the screen. But I was just thinking about what you had said about the aspect ratio of the images and working in the square frame, and that's so well suited to Instagram in particular. So I was just wondering about the intentionality of creating work that's kind of sized or scaled to share in social media terms, and if that was part of what you were aiming for to try to have that sense of sharing with this work.
It definitely was. I think because I always knew, because I generally just post my personal work, so I knew this aspect ratio would work well just for social media purposes. But it also, like, I did also think about, you know, this isn't a film, so I don't have to make it some kind of rectangular aspect ratio. Like, it doesn't need to be a widescreen or anything like that. So it kind of worked out for me both ways. And I also thought about, you know, back when cinema was first introduced, and the really old TV sets, they were all square formatted. So I think that also, you know, solidified my choice in making it square, because if this is supposed to be nostalgic, then it would make sense to have it be square, because I think when we think of older media, it's kind of already set in a square. So I think it worked out that way as well.
So just keeping track of time, are we going into Q&As now, or because I can keep asking questions too?
I think I would love to give Sailaja just one more opportunity, because I saw you sort of nodding and smiling along. But then after that, maybe we can go to Q&A.
I wanted to ask if you could say a little bit more about the color palette, because there's something I can't quite put my finger on about. Like, definitely there's like a sort of nostalgicness to it, but there's something about it also that is very very place-based to me, like something about the redness of that pinkish red color and the pinkish redness of the earth in some parts of South India. Like, that was really evocative to me. And I also wondered if you could say a little bit about say a little bit more about clothing and the choices that you made with the characters.
So color palette wise, you know, that was definitely part of the thought, was to have that kind of earthy feeling to it. And South India is generally like fairly warm or hot throughout the year. So, you know, having a warmer tint to it, definitely, at least to me, it made more sense. But also, I think on an emotional level, when we think of nostalgic things, I think we tend to think of them as warmer, because they kind of warm your heart in a way. So I think it worked out in all of those levels, and it was kind of a matter of, you know, making my color choices that are friendly to that warmer palette. And but I have a tendency to go sometimes too warm, so I had to try and offset them with some greens and blues to kind of cool it down a little bit, just balance wise, compositionally. So I tried to place those elements in contrast to each other, like even on screen, they're kind of like diagonally placed. And that's something just compositionally I've kind of learned over the years. So that was definitely part of the thought process. So even especially with, I think the first piece, the coconut piece, the school kid, I knew what his uniform needed to be. I knew I wanted those blue shorts because I used to wear blue shorts as a school-going kid, and a lot of schools have that uniform. So I knew I wanted that particular one. So then it was kind of a matter of, okay, then to offset that choice of like a white and blue, what do I need the vendor's clothes to look or to feel like color-wise? So they're kind of diagonally offset in that way. And then there are certain like things like skin tone and props. I think they're kind of automatically asking for a certain color choice. So that was kind of built in. So I knew I kind of had to start with those and then see what my variables are. I know this might start to sound like really technical, but I think like trying to balance these things was like a matter of like trying out a few things and kind of seeing what sticks, and also thinking about how to make a balanced composition.
Like the wicker chair needs to be the color of a wicker chair,
right?
So then you have to work around that.
And I kind of needed like warmer background, so I definitely needed some of the clothing choices to feel cooler. So with the grandfather piece, he's kind of wearing a blue top, so that was definitely no accident. And kind of a plain white, dhoti. So it's a little more technical in the way I thought about it, but I definitely tried to, at least overall, try to keep in mind the slightly warmer tinted feel to it. And then you asked about clothes. So clothing wise, I kind of approached it in a similar way. There are just some clothes that just had to be that, or else it doesn't work for me. With the water pump piece, I think I needed her to wear a sari, so because that's just what felt natural. And with the kid, I had kind of played around with just a regular t-shirt instead of a bunion. And I kind of felt like, man, there must be a more specific choice than just a regular t-shirt, And finally, I looked at some images, and then it just like hit me. Oh yeah, I need to make this a bunion.
It's
like
a
that.
Bunion.
Yeah, that makes it way more believable.
Totally.
I think, and gives it its own specificity for him as a character. So yeah, that's kind of how I thought about it.
I just wanted to also say that on multiple viewings of these pieces, I just found myself really focused on the feet. I think that, just thinking about the way that people's feet, the characters' feet move, and the toes, and the boy at the table with the cricket bat when he's leaning back, I think you did a lovely job with those feet.
Oh, thank you. I definitely thought a lot about that as well. I think we kind of underestimate how much we do with our hands and feet in daily life, and that actually gives a lot more expression to gestures and just the way people behave themselves and hold themselves. I think a lot of it has to do with what our arms, hands, feet, and legs are doing. And I feel like I maybe don't see that enough in animation also. So I kind of like doubled down on it. And at least for me, I think most Indians, when they're at home, you're not wearing shoes or anything. So kind of seeing bare feet was also really important to me. And kind of taking care of like, what do those toes look like? And yeah, so I definitely thought a lot about it.
Well, maybe this is a good time to invite all the attendees, if they want to ask a question, feel free to put that in the Q&A, or if you'd like to speak your question, you can certainly use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you. Let me take a look in the Q&A here. So we have one comment that says, "I feel such deep nostalgia too. Thank you for this talk. What stood out for me was that all your characters owned power, Tarun, and that this is rare while depicting these scenes in other contexts. Even though these scenes are imagined, they're empowering in times when freedom and dignity are at stake in India." And they ask, do you ever think of reclaiming power for some of these characters, especially the mother at the water pump, whose life might not be ideal, but she and her son take a moment to be playful with each other? Marginalized people in India are rarely given the kind of agency in depictions of their lives.
Yeah, that's thank you for that. First of all, yeah, I can't say that I gave it too much thought, but at least with that last piece, I did think about, a lot of people's lives can be hard, but there are definitely some tender moments that actually make them enjoy life. So I definitely wanted that specific piece with the water pump to feel that way, and at least for that, I thought it was nice to have them collect water, which might seem like a chore to a lot of people, and it is kind of a chore, and it's just part of their daily routine. But was there a way to kind of enliven that, and put it in a more pleasant light? Like it's not such a bad thing, like you can have a good time. And I definitely like recall times like, playing with my cousins, like near a water pump. Like we're just like tossing water around. Like that's just something kids do. But I also thought about, at least as like an animator, you're kind of playing with people's expectations just a tiny bit, like on a very minuscule level. So you might think maybe the kid would try to play with the water. So I thought it might actually be nice if the mom did it, and it could be a more playful moment between them, instead of it feeling sad. Yeah,
It definitely was. When I saw that, it was the first one that made me like, it triggered me to go back and watch again and watch them all with a little bit more like a closer attention, especially as I had mentioned, when she adjusts her sari and she gives that look before she splashes the water. I just thought it was really beautiful and tender.
thank you.
We have another question from Meghna, who says, I'm an Indian American and grew up in an environment with mostly STEM-oriented people around me, so science, technology, engineering, math, especially my peers and family. It sounds like you've had artists around close by, or at least you did with your dad. So I'm curious as to what that was like, and maybe that's what's affected your journey as an artist.
Yeah, I have to say, I still, even with that, I still grew up with a fairly STEM-oriented background. Everyone around me was kind of going into things like engineering or becoming a doctor. So I think being from an Indian background, that's kind of like almost the default in a way. And I was definitely kind of headed toward that direction. And I can't really say that I was exposed to too many artists. Like my dad played violin throughout my childhood. That was always present, but it was also understood that, you know, just through my schooling and everyone around me and society in general, that I was at least intended to go into engineering or something close to that. So I can't say that I had too much exposure to it growing up, but I did always. I think I was very distracted in the sense of I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing, and I was drawing or doodling instead, or just goofing around. So, but you know, when I decided I needed to go in this direction, it was kind of especially in college. That's kind of where I got a lot more exposure to people like me and artists of all different kinds, and that kind of opened my mind up more artistically, at least. Just learning a lot, and ever since then too, I work with so many different talented artists. So I think that influence is ever present now, but it wasn't always like that. Well, was there a second part of the question that I didn't get to?
So let me just reread.
Sorry.
That's okay. It sounds like you've had artists around you or close by, like in your family, which you spoke to. So they say, I'm curious, what was that like? And maybe having those people around affected your practice in some way.
Yeah, I think looking back, having my dad always play violin, that was probably, at least in my day-to-day life, that was the artistic influence. Even though I didn't, it felt like a different art, and but I think looking back, it was definitely there. Like that was always present. But yeah, sorry, did they ask about influences?
Oh, they were just saying like if those people that were close by who were also artistic, if they influenced what you're doing now and maybe in your personal practice. So I think we've sort of seen that your dad's music maybe has, if not influenced, certainly complemented what you're doing in a beautiful way. And all the artists you've met at school.
Yeah, I think it definitely came around to that point eventually where I was able to connect these two elements, at least with this piece. And I don't think I ever saw it that way before, but when I was finishing up this piece, you know, it just made sense that you know, having him do the music would be great. So yeah, I'm only seeing it connect more recently, but I didn't totally feel the presence of it, at least in the sense that maybe I might have liked growing up. So yeah, but I think even the lack of, or at least to me at the time, what felt like the lack of that sort of influence was, I think, also key in me wanting to pursue that direction even more, just because of how strongly I felt about it. And I kind of needed to get exposed more, or get into an environment that would expose me more to it. So, but you know, I think like anything that happens in your life ends up influencing you in some way. So I think it's just kind of part of whatever your journey is, really.
I find that I find what you just said really interesting, because at the beginning of the chat you said maybe you don't really consider yourself to have like a practice, but that to me, like filtering your own personal experiences through your artwork and letting it come out is one of the key parts of having a practice. So I just thought I would throw that out there. We had some praise from one of the attendees who said, "Hi Tarun, this is from Andre. Hi Tarun, really wonderful work. You had me at the way the tea customer arrived, tapped the counter in that entitled way, and loped over to the step to take his stance. Then the grandfather's prehensile toes, again, the toes, and that exact heft of the coconut in the heft of the coconut vendor's hand, the tack, tack, chop. It's just marvelous work." And then a question that says, "I want to ask, do you have any tips or tricks for sustaining a daily animation practice?"
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. And, you know, especially with the coconut one, I think I failed to mention this before, but that was definitely one of the details that I picked up from watching reference. You know, I've definitely experienced, you know, getting coconut water myself like multiple times growing up, but I never had to think about, you know, what does that for him, for the seller to actually have to cut open a coconut, what is it that you have to do to a coconut? You know, there's a very specific way they hold it because they've been doing it for so long, and there's kind of a pattern that they've established for themselves, and there's a certain weight to the coconut that somehow they also feel comfortable with handling, and the ease with which, you know, they use the knife. And I kind of saw, like, just to pull one tiny example, like he chops it 3 times. He chops it 3 times, one, because I felt like more than that was too many times to watch, just as a person watching it. But also there's a little tiny bit of coconut that's kind of left that he has to pull out. And that was something I saw in a lot of videos that I felt like, you know, that's like something, there's something very human about that, like not cutting it open like perfectly and having to like pull out the last little bit. And rhythmically, you know, thinking about timing and rhythm, that helped me a lot, you know, having that little piece there, because it felt like, you know, I could establish a pattern and then kind of accent with pulling out the little piece in terms of timing. So I just wanted to throw that in. And then the question about tips and tricks, you know, I think for daily sustainable work, it might sound counterproductive, but I think it's actually taking a lot of breaks and actually not working every day, or not like overdoing it, and actually taking a day off here and there. There are definitely plenty of days where I don't do anything related to my work or personal work, even though I would like to. I think I've come to a point where I realize how important rest really is, and both in terms of sleep and rest for your you know, your hands, at least for someone who uses hands for the work that I do. You know, if you overdo it, yeah, I don't really want to get RSI or anything. Like, if I want to do this in the long term, I need to establish a healthy pace for myself. So, but it's also, I think, mentally, I think it really helps to take breaks, and it actually gives you time to reflect back on the work that you're doing, and then also come back to it with fresh eyes and see it differently. And, you know, I like to think of it as giving it time to bake, almost, is the way, like, if I'm struggling with an idea, whether it's personal or professional, like, I've come to the point where now where I just just take a break, like no matter where I am in the timeline of things or how many things I have to do. Because I know that that break will give me the mental space to at least in the back of my head kind of process whatever the problem is and come back at it with a fresher perspective. And it's almost always, I can't think of a time where it hasn't helped me. So that's, I think if I have a tip, that's the one.
That's a great tip. And that is one, as an artist, that I work with all the time. Yeah, I think it's so easy to get caught up in this idea that we have to be constantly, making something either to remain an artist, or now that we're all at home during COVID and we have to feel productive. So I think that's a really good tip.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I definitely get stuck in that too. I'm not. I don't think I totally follow my own advice all the time either, because even during these vignettes, I found myself actually maybe doing things too fast or getting too eager to finish something or put in like too much time and effort in a way that was maybe slightly burning me out. So I think also stopping at 5 vignettes was also a way for me to just kind of put an end to it for my own self, like mentally, so that I can also move on to other projects that I have, but also to not get into an unhealthy place of doing it. But also I think eventually I might have gotten stuck in a rut if I was to do a lot more of these vignettes. I think it would have ended up getting reduced in quality, maybe.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end our conversation. I see it in the chat or in the Q&A, so I have to say it. It's just a comment from Angela, who is one of the other artists during Wintertide. So they said, just a comment rather than a question. I appreciate the way you have focused on everyday life and material culture rather than the exotic and spectacular iconic representations of India. I found it familiar and delightful, as did my son, who's 11. When he saw them on the McLaren, it was amazing and so affirming for him. He's quite cognizant of being a minority and the lack of diversity in school. So this representation of a skinny brown kid really meant a lot to him, and thank you. So
that's amazing to hear. Thank you so much.
I also want to say thanks to Tarun for sharing your work and your time, Alana, Deepali, Sailaja, everyone, our sponsors, Chris from Sandbox, Emily for providing some tech support, just for this wonderful conversation. So I hope you all enjoyed it, and I think that's where we'll end things. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Honestly, it's an honor.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.